Hello, I'm Dr. Roger Bromé, and this is Psych Clips. Today, I want to talk about intentionality. And intentionality is a philosophical word for the basic structure of consciousness or structure of the mind. Your mind is located here with you. You're always the subject of your own world. And so, being the subject of your own world, your mind or your subjectivity generates mental action toward the world and toward the objects in the world. So we would say that the intentional structure is the subject, the subjective act or mental act toward an object or state of affairs. This was the principle of intentionality as taught by phenomenologist Edmund Husserl in the early 20th century and is carried through in existential and phenomenological psychology. The way that it applies to sports is that if you understand the intentional structure as the structure of aboutness, the structure of meaning to which you as an individual relate to the circumstances that you're in or the objects within that circumstance, then you can start unpacking where different objects and different focuses of that intentionality drive the way that you experience any kind of a sporting event or a competition, or even the way that you experience training. Our minds are projected from that subjectivity. So when we talk about projecting, we're talking about where we experience different kinds of objects. When we have somebody that has a phantom limb phenomenon, for example, somebody has an amputation and the arm that is missing has an itch in the hand. They don't experience the itch in their head. Your mind is not just in your head. Your mind projects out. And so when a person with a phantom limb pain or phantom limb itch or something like that experiences it out there where the hand would be. And let's say, for instance, they have a partial amputation from the elbow down. They can move that itch by moving the arm, and they can feel that itch out there in the extended limb that would be there. This is important because when we're in a sporting event, we oftentimes will project our attention or our focus out on the ball, the puck, or the other player, or the hoop in a basketball situation. Players that were taught to focus on the backside of the hoop when shooting a basketball, instead of focusing on the ball itself, were a lot more effective in actually sinking the shots. This is the same thing that we do when we're doing firearms or archery shooting. When we think the bullet into the target or the projectile into the target, when we focus our attention on that and we project our attention into the target, we do better in terms of landing the shot. And so this is a very important thing to keep in mind, even as a strength trainer or power lifter, is especially in times of strain when we start to experience that subjective effort. We talk about RPE, that perceived effort and that rating of it. That requires you to take your intentional structure of your mind and reflect. What am I experiencing? What am I feeling as I'm doing this strenuous task? Reflection is necessary for some goals within strength training and bodybuilding and different types of sporting practice. But over reflecting or too much focus on the self in competition can lead to choking. It disrupts the automation of the skill that you have acquired through practicing that skill. It also will create insecurities within that performance. So it's very important that when you're in a clutch situation or you're in a circumstance where you're going to focus on achieving something, or achieving a strength feat, or even in terms of like long distance running, if you start to move your focus into yourself and into the suffering, you'll have a tendency to experience more suffering than if you project your consciousness, project your mind down the road at a goal, down the road at a focal point. And for lifting, this has proven, even in my own experience, to be helpful. And for example, I had a deadlift in a competition. I was up for the deadlift. I had um, all my equipment ready to go. I'd done my warm up. But one thing I hadn't tried is I hadn't tried pulling the bar with my belt on in the warm up room. I had just gone up to a really pretty good weight um, in my deadlift suit, and I hadn't put the belt on yet. So I got up to around 500 pounds and it pulled pretty well. I felt good. So I was focused in on that experience, that RPE of how did that feel and how do I feel about my opener. When I got out on the platform and I was ready to go and I snapped my belt shut, I reached for the bar and found that I couldn't get down to it between my suit and the belt. And standing in a conventional deadlift stance, I couldn't reach the bar the same way that I could without the belt on. And at that time, I hadn't pulled sumo in a very, very long time due to an injury. So what I did was I tried to pull it conventional and I really forced myself down to the bar, but I didn't get a good grip on the bar. And because I was experiencing the discomfort and the strain of trying to get down there, I had focused my intentionality in on my own experience. And when I pulled the bar, I got the bar about halfway up over my knees, and my left hand started to strip, and it absolutely tore the calluses off my hand. And so now I had a bloody palm and no opener on the deadlift. So for me to finish the competition and get a total, I had to pull two more attempts, but I had to do that with a raw hand. And so what I did was I made a couple of adjustments. Now, this is a really important thing, is to accept when things are not going the way that you planned according to your prep and everything, that you're going to have to be able to be flexible and make some adjustments. So what I decided to do was, being that I had the support of my suit and the belt, I decided to give sumo a try so that I could get a little bit lower on the bar before the pull. That would give me a better grip on the bar, and my grip was already compromised on my left hand. The other thing was is that my hand was raw and it was bleeding, and I thought the only way that I can keep it from bleeding and continue to bleed is just pack it with some chalk. So that's what I did, is I packed it with some chalk. When it was my turn, I went up. I took my sumo stance. I reached down to the bar and I grabbed a hold of it. But this time I projected my focus, I projected my mentality into the bar and focused on me and the bar and nothing really in between. No bodily experience or psychological experience in between my hands and the will of the pull. So when I got a hold of that bar, I squeezed that bar for everything that I had, which helped me to keep the focus on the bar. And as I pulled that bar up, it just went off the ground. Great. It went up, it locked out, and I got my second attempt. Well, my goal for that meet was to pull a around 685 deadlift. I hadn't pulled that in competition for a very long time. During this competition, it had been years since I had been competing. So I decided I really, really wanted to hit that kind of six plate milestone. And so that was the amount I called, but I knew with a compromised grip on my hand and that kind of a thing, that now I didn't know if I could hold on to the bar. So what I did is I went through the same mental procedure as I did on the second attempt. I packed my hand full of chalk. I got my wrist wraps around my wrist really tight so that I had as much help on my grip as I could possibly get. And when I walked up to the bar, I made a conscious decision to just focus on holding on to that bar until I either passed out or it drug me back to the ground. But I was going to grab the bar and I was just going to pull and continue to pull until something else gave, whether it was, pass out or gravity just took me back down. I reached down, I grabbed a hold of the bar, I got a really, really good grip, and I squoze with everything that I had, and I pulled with everything that I had, and that bar came up, and it went right up and locked out. And I attribute the success of that lift, even though it had been a lift that I hadn't done in the gym for a very, very long time too. I attribute that to being focused and focusing my mind on the external task rather than reflective intentionality on myself and how I was feeling and what I was thinking. I just really let go of everything that had to do with me, my personal experience, decided to focus everything in on the task and the things that I needed to do externally, pushing my feet to the floor, gripping the bar, pulling straight up. All of those things that are the external mechanics of making the lift were the things I focused on. So the important thing about this is that in order to reflect, you have to turn yourself into an object of reflection. So, and we see this in language. I make myself or a me linguistically into a self-reflective thing so that I am thinking about me. And that reflection, excuse me, or metacognition is something that when it's time to perform is a disaster. On the other hand, when you're practicing for form, or you're training for hypertrophy and you want to get that good mind muscle connection, now it's time to reflect your mind into the muscle, into the experience of the muscle and getting that pump and getting that burn. So the intentionality is different because the purpose is different. The meaning structure of that activity becomes different. And so as you move along in both your training for competition, the practice of skills, pay attention to where you're directing your mind and where you're directing your focus. That when it's time to, make a different body position or something like that to perform technique better, slow everything down and point your consciousness in on your body, on yourself, and help yourself go through that. But once it's time to perform, you have to let the psychomotor skill that you've acquired in practice, you have to let the attention go off of that and into performing the task, to kicking the ball into the goal, to shooting the puck into the goal. You've got to focus at the place that you're shooting at and not in the process of shooting. So when we talk about being process focused and outcome focused, sometimes process focused is the right thing to do, and sometimes outcome focus or performance execution focused is the right thing to do. And you have to decide which one is which, dependent upon the goal of the thing that you're doing at the time. If you're in the middle of action, if you're in the middle of the game and you start reflecting about technique and those kinds of things, you get too many like lifting cues involved, or you start breaking skills down into sequential movements. That is when you will disrupt automation and you will actually create more vulnerability to mistakes. That's what we call choking. So I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, please like and share it with others. Think about it in terms of how you can apply it, not only to your sport and your performance, but also how you can uh, apply this to other parts of your life in terms of things that you want to achieve, things that you're working on in order to build in terms of skills. Think about where you're directing and where you're projecting your consciousness in that intentional structure. Thank you for watching.